celebrating 45 years on the air. Award-winning Farm Week is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week, drought making the wildfires worse. Almost 80 fires across the nation. Plus, ethanol back on the radar.
Big oil has raised its ugly head again.
A new bill would weaken the demand for corn. In Southern gardening, Gary says good things come in small packages. And farmers getting better at conservation, helping the Mississippi River downstream. Farm Week starts right now.
Hello everyone, I'm Zach Ashmore.
And I'm Mike Russell. Thanks for joining us today on Farm Week. Officials say June was the hottest in 171 years of record keeping. The high temps continue to put pressure on the West as the growing drought creeps across the country. The heat has made for tender, dry conditions in the forest, making it prone to fire. Jonah Holland has more.
We're seeing extensive drought conditions across the state, with 19 counties in drought emergencies, unprecedented heat waves, and fire seasons that are arriving earlier, coming on faster, and lasting for longer.
Last week, Oregon Governor Kate Brown gave a dire assessment of wildfires and drought plaguing the state, with part of the blame pointed at climate change.
After last year, what is very clear is that no corner of our state is immune to fire. On the West Coast and here in Oregon, the urgent and dangerous climate crisis has exacerbated conditions on the ground.
According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, over 46% of the contiguous 48 states are experiencing some level of drought, an increase of more than 3% from previous measurements. The lack of moisture has fanned wildfire conditions in the West. Officials with the Oregon Forest and Industries Council, a trade association representing more than 50 forest landowners and forest product manufacturers, say the ongoing drought has brought wildfire season to the region nearly 8 weeks ahead of schedule. Oregon's Bootleg Fire, the largest of the 79 active fires burning across the nation, has consumed more than 400,000 acres. Coupled with the loss of more than 1 million acres during last year's wildfire season, timberland and sawmill owners in Oregon are worried about their industry that in 2019 generated roughly $18 billion.
I mean, imagine, right, you've invested 40 years in a cornfield. You can't harvest it until year 40, and you're sitting there on pins and needles just praying to God that it makes it to year 40, and it doesn't. And we don't have insurance for any of that.
With forecasters calling for drought conditions to become even more extreme in the West, Williams worries about what that means for the rest of the 2021 wildfire season and the impact on Oregon forests.
I hate the word unprecedented. It just doesn't seem, it seems overused. But in this case, again, the conditions, we're 2 months ahead. We are a long ways from done with this summer and with what we're going to see in terms of the fire out here.
Reporting for Farm Week, I'm Jonah Holland.
At the same time, a shortage of jet fuel for some airplanes used to fight fires. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that at smaller, hard-to-reach airports in Montana and California, jet fuel is low and sometimes unavailable. Meanwhile, because of the high temps, Oregon OSHA has put an aggressive heat rule in effect to protect outdoor workers, including those in agriculture. The rule incorporates each day's heat index with stricter rules on hotter days. It mandates regular rest and access to shade or air conditioning. At the same time, employers must provide cool drinking water free to workers when it's 80 or higher outside. They must provide training to cope with the heat, monitoring on hotter days, and when it's 90 or above, an emergency medical plan.
In other news, ethanol, mostly made from corn, has been a federal mainstay in the U.S. gasoline supply for more than 15 years. Over the past several weeks, though, the ethanol industry has endured increasing pressure from opponents over blending mandates. Josh Bittner has more.
This week, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators, mostly from states where the oil industry is a major part of the local economy, unveiled legislation to eliminate the federal mandate requiring a percentage of corn-based ethanol be mixed into the nation's fuel supply. Other biofuels would be unaffected, but the move ruffled feathers in the Corn Belt.
Big oil has raised its ugly head again.
Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley pledged to fight the bill and said farm state lawmakers have been battling the petroleum industry since just after the inception of the renewable fuel standard in 2005. Though year-round sales of E15 was struck down by a federal appeals court earlier this month, and the granting of small refinery exemptions accelerated during President Trump's tenure, Grassley expressed some confidence in current Environmental Protection Agency oversight.
That's not saying that I can guarantee you that the Biden people are going to be as pro-ethanol as I want them to be, but I don't think we're going to have them finding this balance.
The American Petroleum Institute, a trade association for the oil and natural gas industry, weighed in on the Corn Ethanol Elimination Act. The EPA would best serve the public interest by keeping compliance volumes feasible and maintaining program stability by not exceeding the ethanol blend wall. We appreciate the growing recognition that the RFS program needs a comprehensive overhaul to better protect consumers and businesses working to meet fuel demand for various modern engines. Ethanol insiders say similar legislation is teed up almost every congressional session under what they call dubious environmental and economic claims to force de facto negotiation.
It's amazing how impervious D.C. is to basic facts, right? I mean, sometimes you can say, hey, here's a problem, I think we should solve it this way, I think we should solve it this way, but there should be some basic facts, right? Ethanol reduces the cost of gasoline.
Iowa Renewable Fuels Association Executive Director Monty Shaw thinks this go-around was spurred by recent congressional attempts to fix the E15 issue.
We're used to it, but I have a very clear message for them. You know, we're not interested. Right? We will find a way to sell E15 year-round. We've got other both federal EPA ways and ways that individual states can level the playing field for E10 and E15.
To reiterate, the new bill is called the Corn Ethanol Mandate Elimination Act. It would end the corn ethanol mandate in the Renewable Fuel Standard, RFS, originally created under the Energy Policy Act of 2005.
Those on the right to repair bandwagon got a shot in the arm recently. The Federal Trade Commission voted unanimously to ramp up law enforcement against repair restrictions or trade practices that prevent small businesses and consumers from fixing their own products. For now, the vote doesn't apply to farm equipment, but following the president's recent executive order, the movement has plenty of support, including that of most major farm groups. In a statement, the FTC said it will target repair restrictions that violate antitrust laws.
On the lighter side, if you don't have a lot of room for highfalutin landscaping, never fear. In this week's Southern Gardening, horticulturalist Gary Bachman says that good things come in small packages. In other words, small yard doesn't necessarily mean small impact. Here's Gary.
I'm always inspired by the potential of a small landscape space. Let's take a look at how simple ideas and techniques transforms a small backyard. I love this raised landscape bed, from the pavers to the plant selections. New Gold Lantana, an original Mississippi medallion selection in 1996, with its sprawling growth and golden yellow flowers, anchors the ends. This bed is a pollinator magnet, starting with the red and orange tropical butterfly weed. The Mystic Spire salvia is impressive with the bright blue flower spikes. Candy corn cupfia has upright red stems covered with yellow and red tubular flowers that resemble the tasty kernels of the sugary candy it's named after. Yellow shrimp plant, a 2000 Mississippi medallion winner, completes this raised bed. On the other side of the yard, the red shrimp plant complements its yellow cousin. I love the hanging baskets on the fence that are overflowing with red-orange purslane and bright red geranium. Colorful containers are featured on the back porch. Dipladenia is a great choice for color in the full sun container. The full bushy growth with colorful funnel-shaped flowers are gorgeous. Other container-grown selections include the magenta variegated sun patience, yellow-flowered calibrachoa, and more geraniums. A couple of focal points for me are the woven trunk tropical hibiscus and the big tomato plant. This backyard is a great example that a small space can have big landscape impact. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and I'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a short break here, but stick around. Coming up on our Farm Week feature, asking Iowa farmers to become better at conservation. A unique partnership aimed at improving water quality downstream in the Mississippi River may be gaining ground. Iowa ag nutrients flow into the river in large quantities, and it hopes to cut that flow. Downstream in the Gulf, where a dead zone plagues fishermen, profits are tied to the quality of that water. A new approach to an old problem. That's coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
I believe in people and their hopes, their aspirations and their faith. I believe in my own work and in the opportunity I have to make my life useful to humanity. I believe that education is a lifelong process, and the greatest university is the home. That my success as a teacher is proportional to those qualities of mind and spirit that give me welcome entrance to the homes of the families that I serve. Because I believe these things, I am an extension professional.
In Extension, we work hard to make sure that we're providing the best science-based education to our clients because we know that you need answers and solutions that you can rely on. It's natural to have questions, and it's important to be able to turn to experts that you can trust. I trust experts myself for the health of my family's cattle and crops, and for my health too. That's why I decided to get the COVID-19 vaccine as soon as it was available to me. I want to protect myself, my family, and my neighbors from this devastating disease. And I want to get back to all of the happy times together that we have missed. So get the facts you need and get the vaccine. Let's all get back to the people we love and the activities we enjoy.
Time for the market report. We are in a weather market, apparently.
That's right, Mike. We'll be talking about that and a whole lot more. This week in the markets, we'll give you the closing numbers for the commodities we follow on Farm Week. We'll also look at the impact on row crops and finally, how those numbers affect cattle prices. Markets on a slight downward trend last week, reflecting what appears to be a correction after the previous week's highs. Let's take a look. Last week's biggest loss, soybeans about 37 cents. That's after a rise of 57 cents a week ago. Last week's biggest gain, lumber at $98. Looks like a correction from falling prices the past 2 months. Cattle also up at about 1.5 cents. We'll be talking more about that in a bit. So, row crops all down. Corn export sales not as high as expected, and soybeans also in a flux. Market analyst Ted Seifert says that's because we're deep into a weather market.
Right now, this time of year, the market is very wrapped up in weather. You know, this is a weather market. This is the time of year for that. However, you know, let's look at this. We're at the end of July, and this is right around the time where we will put our highs in for markets if we haven't already, and then seasonally head lower because regardless of what has happened with the weather, even if it is a year where we've had some drought issues and we've had some supply side concerns, at some point we have to go and prove the demand is out there, right? We look at these USDA balance sheets, and I'm a big fan of USDA balance sheets, but you know, let's take them for what they are. They're estimates. They're estimating what the demand is going to be. And until we see that demand, we can't really say for sure that it's there. And we haven't really been able to see it in corn. Export sales, as you mentioned, have really been poor. We saw old crop cancellations, specifically by China. That scares the market. So, while I don't think there's a tremendous amount of downside potential in corn because of the issues that they had in Brazil and the fact that that crop is short, if prices get too cheap, the rest of the world will come and buy more corn from us. They will be buying more corn from us. So I don't think we see this huge slide. Even with the drought issues that we've had in some areas, there's some really good corn out there as well. And I don't see this as being a big catastrophe for our corn crop or our national average yield. I don't think we're quite going to be where the USDA has us at their trend line. But I don't see this as being a catastrophe. And at this point, the market probably is going to transition a bit more towards looking at the demand side of things, unless it really just stays hot and dry from here to the end of harvest. So weather in the soybeans is a little bit a different story than what we're talking about in corn, because corn, for the most part, has gotten or is getting through pollination right now. But soybeans, their most moisture-sensitive period is when we get into August. So we are really watching that forecast very closely for soybeans, and that's what happened this week when we see more rain in the third week out. We see more rain as we get into August for soybeans, and that put a lot of pressure on us. We started to see that on Wednesday. That was the first little hint of it, so we just had a bit of a pullback and kind of held it together. But as we grew confidence on that Thursday and Friday, that's when beans really came under pressure. And here's the situation in the beans. Yes, we're worried about weather, but if it doesn't seem like that weather is going to be a terrible problem, there too we're going to start focusing on demand, maybe even more so than corn. Because Brazil did have a really big bean crop. And we have to be worried that China isn't making their purchases of new crop beans right now. This is the time they normally would be doing that. Now, what would motivate them to do that? If the drought continues into pod set and there's a ton of concern, well, that would be a motivating factor for them to come in and buy, and that would flush out the demand, because they're going to say, hey, the prices are high, but they could be going much higher, so we need to buy now before the stocks run out. But if that doesn't happen, if we have a more normal August and there are rain chances and they are not worried about it and they're not aggressively buying, they're going to wait for us to bring the price down. The soybeans, I think, are on the verge of what I'm calling a demand hunting expedition, meaning we're going to have to bring prices down to flush that demand out, get the demand cooking again, and then we can start talking about a harvest low, and then we can start talking about how tight balance sheets could be later on. And so the lower we go now, I think the higher we could end up going later, but we need to prove that demand, because right now it just doesn't seem to be there.
Cattle up slightly this past week. Seems that's because of the recent USDA cattle on feed report. In short, it says U.S. cattle on feed down 1% and placements down 7% from June 2020. Once again, Ted Seifert breaks it down for us.
Cattle has been in a very sideways range since the beginning of the calendar year, and it's not really based on fundamentals. Fundamentally, I'm really rather bullish on cattle. I think there's very strong domestic demand. I think there's reason to think that we could be making new highs in cattle. But the problem is the cash trade just isn't going there. It's not even really moving, for that matter. And as long as that cash trade doesn't do anything, I don't see any reason for the cattle market itself to really do much of anything. But the cash has been king, and cash needs to kind of allow the board to go higher for us to really feel good about any upside potential in cattle right now. Here's a little different story. I mean, that's really sort of a reflection of what's going on with the corn market. Mm-hmm. And as we talked about earlier, corn had been under pressure late this week, and we had a down week in corn, so that's really helping the feeder cattle market. Prices go higher. My outlook for corn, I think, is a little bit on the bearish side of things. Even if we do have a bit of hot and dry, which looks like that will persist, I still feel like there's going to be timely rains, and I still feel like we'll make a harvest low. So there's a time frame here where I think feeder cattle have a bit more upside potential as well because of the lower corn prices.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. We're deep into summer growing season. Weather the biggest factor right now. Let's see if things turn around. Mike?
Today, a follow-up on a recent Farm Week conservation story. Iowa farm runoff has been a major portion of the contents of what runs in the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf. But a unique partnership may help lead to a cleaner river, and that would make fishermen happy. Once again, here's Josh Bittner.
The boat has been slow. My catering operation is pretty much non-existent. You don't have the corporate events, you don't have the weddings and things like that.
Charlie Kretzinger's Dubuque, Iowa business was hit hard by the economic side effects of COVID-19. Income streams like river cruises are anchored to his restaurant, Catfish Charlie's, located on the banks of the Mississippi River, which specializes in fresh river-caught cuisine.
You got the filet on the back here? Right around the front. We call them collars. So we're going to saute some of that up in a white wine clam sauce. Obviously, we shut down the restaurant for, 6, 7, 8 weeks? I can't remember, but we did to-go orders. And that was slow. I mean, it was a lot of to-go orders compared to what we normally do, but You can't do that type of volume. You're selling food, now you're not selling a drink with it.
Kretzinger works with local fishermen who catch carp and catfish under a commercial license permitted by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources.
That's our Cajun catfish with a Cajun shrimp Creole. We take catfish to another level, and we're proud of our catfish.
While a fresh Iowa catch matters to local economies of scale, state officials estimate the value of all fish and their eggs along Big Muddy's Iowa coast at just $600,000 annually.
American Lady out.
That's a drop in the bucket compared to the $320 million the Hawkeye State rakes in licensing 500,000 anglers every year. Iowa DNR says around 180 Iowa licensed commercial fishermen and helpers work the Mississippi River every year, though few as their sole means of employment. But their profits and Kretzinger's are tied in part to the health of the river.
In Dubuque County, we have a lot of highly erodible land. Stream bank erosion, the more sediment we can keep out of our streams, it's huge for aquatic life, the Mississippi River, and so forth.
Northeast Iowa farmers and conservationists have joined forces in the past to address land-related water quality and habitat issues. An ambitious new approach looks to build on that heritage by dovetailing into a larger proactive environmental framework.
The city of Dubuque was the first city in the state of Iowa to enter an MOU with the DNR as it relates to kind of the process of how the nutrient reduction exchange would work.
Eric Schmeckel is Watershed Program Director with Dubuque Soil and Water Conservation District. Through a first-of-its-kind agreement, the district has teamed up with city, county, and state government to implement the Iowa Nutrient Exchange Project. And officials in Dubuque say a handful of other Iowa cities and towns would like to adopt a similar approach.
It is not a law, it's a voluntary approach from the city of Dubuque and the Iowa DNR to say, let's try and develop a collaboration, a partnership with point source and non-point source water permits that look at how we can work together to improve water quality.
Dubuque's Urban-Rural Pact builds upon the state's Nutrient Reduction Strategy, or NRS. First enacted in 2013, the guidelines are designed to combat Iowa's alleged disproportionate contribution to the weather, chemical, land, and water use cocktail downed by the Mississippi River and delivered into the Gulf of Mexico. The resulting oxygen-deprived or hypoxic region, more commonly known as the dead zone, has been plagued by seasonal runoff-fed algae growth. This year, scientists measured the area, incapable of supporting aquatic life, at over 2,000 square miles. Environmental critics say Iowa's goal to reduce nutrient flows by 45% has no teeth. But Schmeckel says his NRS-aligned conservation work with upstream farmers goes further, with an alternative to expensive environmental compliance for municipal utilities tasked with shaving wastewater output of nitrogen and phosphorus to 66% and 75%, respectively.
Let's say he wants to convert a field to no-till, or he wants to put a buffer in along a stream. We then model those practices on his field stream using what's called a nutrient tracking tool. We get then outputs of what those reductions are as for both phosphorus and nitrogen. We enter those outputs into a federal database that the DNR then checks, and then the city of Dubuque can claim some of that credit back into their permit.
So I got 17 different species growing in here to try to stimulate my biology.
Cover crops have become an important piece of the financial puzzle for Eric Miller, who raises row crops outside Cascade, Iowa.
The longer you can keep the living root in the soil, the quicker it's going to change the soil.
His plants sequester carbon, build beneficial bacteria to boost traditional commodity yields, and in some cases, bring value-added returns from niche markets.
Just this past year, we started malting our own grains, growing and malting barley here for local breweries. It's almost like a side effect, the better water quality.
Miller says the deeper roots scavenge for nutrients corn and soybeans can't reach, and during rain events, his soil now sponges up and slows down stormwater runoff. He tracks the field data and says he's been able to slice pest and disease control expenses as well.
Anytime there's nutrients leaving our farm, that's money leaving our farm. This is a way for me to kind of take control of my input costs, improve my bottom line.
Considering the sheer volume of regional agricultural products that move down the upper Mississippi corridor, Miller says Iowa's #1 export is still topsoil, and endless work remains. Charlie Kretzinger's primary bounty of bottom feeders might be at home in the muck downstream, but the former farm kid deeply appreciates Dubuque County's stewardship strides.
Anything we can do in the United States to keep things cleaner and better is a beautiful thing. And farming's big business. So when you take ground away from them guys, it hurts them, you know? We're asking them to do things to keep our world a better place. They should be paid for that.
And that is a very collaborative attitude.
Collaboration and science.
Especially these days, ag can be complicated. Well, next week, grab your snorkel, surf and turf. It's all about sustainability. That's especially true out east for farmers whose crops come from the water, like oysters.
Aquaculture is growing big time and the market's getting crowded. So what do? Well, you move inland. How do you do that? And will folks in the Midwest eat oysters? Some farmers and even the government are betting the farm on it. That's next time on Farm Week. Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.